Hi everyone, I'm Ariel Celia, behavioral scientist, recovering academic, and now consultant in tobacco harm reduction. My disclosures are on the screen, but this is my personal channel and not overseen or funded by my employers or clients. Today we're going to talk about Australia. Before we even get into the regulation, I want to set the stage on at least what my opinion of living in Australia is like. There are monster spiders, more monster spiders, spawn of Dracula, giant stinging things, whatever this is. You're not even safe in your own house from the monster spiders and snakes. And not only horrific looking things, but things like the striped anemone whose stings can take months to heal. And true story, the Gimpy Gimpy is the single thing that's making my family never want to visit Australia. Stings that are so painful that they keep you awake for months, and you can't even take a shower for the next several years without it flaring up again and causing unimaginable pain. And that's just the baseline of life in Australia. Then there were wildfires a couple of years ago, and now there are massive numbers of fire bombings, up to 275, according to this latest statistic from Alive Advocacy. But let's back up for a second before we get to the fire bombing part. This has all started, believe it or not, with Australia's approach to regulating e-cigarettes. E-cigarettes are one of the most effective tools for quitting smoking. This is shown time and time again and is now high certainty level of evidence in the Cochrane review, meaning that they're so certain that they think it's unlikely that future studies will change their perspective on this. There are many randomized controlled trials showing that e-cigarettes are effective, more effective than nicotine replacement therapy like the patch or the gum for getting people to switch away from smoking. The other benefit of e-cigarettes is that they have a much wider reach than traditional cessation methods like nicotine replacement therapy. So more people are using them and they're more effective than many other methods. And the impacts are detectable at the population level, especially in the US and UK. And you can see this with several studies recently asking recent quitters what method they use to quit. And by far the most common is e-cigarettes. Australia decided to make this very effective method for quitting smoking only available by prescription. Here's a screenshot from the Australian government explaining the e-cigarette laws. They are not allowed to be sold in tobacconist, vape shop, or convenience stores. Restricted to 18 and older, which makes sense, but only from participating pharmacies. And the nicotine concentration is capped. They have to meet with the pharmacist before purchasing, which includes discussing the product and dosage, discussing whether they have tried other options to quit smoking first, and providing proof of age. They can only buy 1 month's supply at a time. Pharmacists are under no obligation to dispense these vapes. And again, the nicotine concentration is capped. Flavors are restricted. You might think, what's wrong with this model? If e-cigarettes' main benefit is to help people quit smoking, what's wrong with making it prescription only? There's actually quite a bit wrong with this model. First and foremost, it makes the less harmful product much harder to get. You don't need a prescription to buy cigarettes. You don't need to discuss with the convenience store clerk whether cigarettes are appropriate for you. You just get cigarettes. They're available from just about every street corner, every convenience store. They're pervasive. Why does it make sense that the less harmful product would be much harder to get? Why would you put barriers in the way when you're trying to get people away from cigarettes? The second problem is that it restricts options that make e-cigarettes appealing. So in particular here, it limits the nicotine concentration and the flavors, as well as the brands in general. People like variety. Not a single product will work for everybody. People have different preferences and different tastes. There's a case for making a wide range of e-cigarette products available so that people can find what they need to pull them away from smoking. But when they're restricted with a lower nicotine dose, with very constrained flavors, they don't effectively satisfy people that are used to a cigarette. So this also kind of cripples the appeal of e-cigarettes and makes it more difficult to pull people away from smoking. Third is it blocks the accidental switching pathway. This is a major reason for e-cigarettes' success. So when I think about e-cigarettes helping people switch away from smoking, there can be two mechanisms for that. One is what I call the kind of traditional medical route, where somebody decides they want to quit smoking. They seek out a prescription from their doctor if they need to, or they go to the pharmacy to get NRT or e-cigarettes in this case. The point here is that it's a premeditated goal, that they decide to quit smoking and they're seeking out a method to help them with that process. But in the real world, one of the reasons why e-cigarettes are so successful is because of this phenomenon of accidental switching. If you ask the population of people who smoke at any given time, do you want to quit smoking in the next month? Only about 15% of them say they are immediately ready to quit. The rest of them either say, yeah, I want to quit, but I don't know when, not right away. Some of them will even say, I never want to quit. I enjoy it and I never want to give it up. So the point is that the medical route is only available to the approximately 15% of people who smoke and want to quit immediately. But e-cigarettes also act a second way as an alternative consumer product. And this is why they're so much more successful at the population level. So many more people are using them because they're not using them to intentionally quit smoking ahead of time. For many of them, it happens accidentally without them intending to. For some people, it gives them confidence that maybe they can fully quit smoking. And for some people, it's a more gradual process. But the point is, e-cigarettes' effectiveness at the population level depends on people trying them as a consumer product and realizing that maybe they can use these instead of cigarettes. And that's blocked off with the prescription-only model, because if you need to think of yourself as a patient and go see a doctor and go see a pharmacist in order to get this, that's the medical route, and that's off-putting to a lot of people. That brings us to the fourth point, which is that many people who smoke don't consider themselves as patients needing help. Even though cold turkey quitting is not particularly effective in a head-to-head comparison, that still is the most common form, besides e-cigarettes, that people use to help them quit. They want to do it on their own. They don't consider themselves as in need of help from a medical professional. And not to mention stigma. In the Australian model, you have to talk to a pharmacist first, and the pharmacist and the doctor has to ask you, well, have you tried all these other methods of quitting first? And people who smoke do face a lot of stigma from healthcare professionals. So that's off-putting, and that's another barrier in the way of people trying e-cigarettes. Finally, there's no guaranteed access. By law, it said the pharmacists don't have to participate in providing e-cigarettes. And with the widespread misperceptions and all the alarmism in the media about how harmful e-cigarettes are, most people don't know that e-cigarettes are much safer than cigarettes. And it's natural that pharmacists might want nothing to do with this if they think it's a harmful product. And this also ties in with the fire bombings that I mentioned. Many pharmacists want nothing to do with it if it puts their store at risk. So what's going on with the fire bombings? Professor of Criminology James Martin and epidemiologist Ed Jagasathy have been warning about this and publishing about this for some time, that overly restrictive tobacco policies do not eliminate demand for nicotine, they just drive it underground in the illicit market. And it's not just e-cigarettes, it's cigarettes as well, with overly restrictive policies. So there is pretty strong academic literature supporting the idea that raising tobacco taxes reduce smoking behavior, especially among young people who haven't developed the habits yet. So that's a positive public health tool, and it's a valuable use of policy. However, you can't just keep spamming the tax increase button and expect that to drive cigarette smoking to zero. At some point, people are going to find alternative ways to smoke cigarettes. At first, they might get them from different places with lower tax rates. They might switch to cheaper brands. But eventually, if the price differential between the legal market and the illicit market is great enough, that incentivizes a black market to develop. And that's kind of a win-win for the consumer and for the black market. In Australia now, last I heard is that a pack of cigarettes goes for about $55 in Australia, but people can easily get an illicit pack of cigarettes for $10 or even less. So all of this organized crime and the fire bombings related to this are all very a clear, predictable consequence of regulating nicotine products too strictly. And one of the problems with policy research is that it's really hard to tell what the exact effect of one particular policy in one setting is, because you only have one shot at it. There's other factors going on in the economy and in the country that might influence smoking rates. And so without a time machine or the ability to go to a parallel universe to look at what would have happened under a different policy, it's really hard to pinpoint the result of what a policy is. And there's a confirmation bias at work here in the researchers. So the people who called for the policies to begin with rarely admit the possibility that they're wrong or that their policy is backfiring. And you can see in this commentary that even though they kind of admit there's a problem with the illicit market and the heavy price differential between legal and illegal products, you can see the authors are very resistant to making any cuts in cigarette taxes. So they say, rather than simply making all tobacco cheaper, it's crucial to allow time for recently implemented regulations and law enforcement measures to take effect. So this kind of seems like a doubling down. The policy is not working. They are sort of admitting that, but they're saying, oh, we just need more time for the policies to implement, and we need more enforcement, because if we have more enforcement, then that can cut down on some of the illicit activity. Meanwhile, people who were against the policy to begin with, especially the e-cigarette policy, there have been people that are very vocal against making a safer alternative harder to get, putting it behind all these barriers of talking to a doctor and then talking to a pharmacist. And unfortunately, the people who were against the policy are often ignored or accused of being industry shills. You can see some of that language here where they talk about the possibility of lowering taxation as conceding to industry demands. Instead, they want to call for more enforcement and put in more policies to reduce the demand for all tobacco products. And here's a paper that shows a really interesting other perspective. So even though I mentioned that you can't really conclude the effects of one policy in a single setting, you can start evaluating consistency for what you think the effects are by comparing either the same policy across different settings, or maybe in this case, two settings that were similar and had very divergent approaches to regulating e-cigarettes. So you can see here that the trends in New Zealand are green, in Australia are red, and these are adult smoking trends, and they were declining ever since around the year 2000. But they were declining similarly in both countries. And Australia and New Zealand are similar in a variety of different ways. So the interesting comparison here is what happened when they took drastically different turns in regulating e-cigarettes. Australia's cigarette smoking trends kind of declined as usual, like it looks more or less like a flat line over this whole regulation that we've just talked about, where they're regulating e-cigarettes just as pharmaceutical products. Meanwhile, in New Zealand, where they do approach the harm reduction potential of e-cigarettes, the government actually recommends that people who smoke switch to e-cigarettes, and e-cigarettes are available for purchase in a variety of flavors as a retail or consumer product, not behind a prescription or a pharmacy. And what were similar declines in cigarette smoking drastically accelerated in New Zealand. You can see a steep downturn coinciding with the uptake of e-cigarette use. So this is some evidence for population level substitution. And more importantly, it shows the contrast between Australia's approach and New Zealand's approach. And it kind of suggests that, yeah, regulating the less harmful product more strictly than cigarettes is not producing favorable effects in Australia. So to wrap everything up, Australians face enough challenges from Mother Nature, but now they're facing even more human-made hardships. Australia's policy makes e-cigarettes, which pose only a fraction of the harm of cigarettes, much harder to get than the more harmful product, makes them less appealing than cigarettes. So this puts a lot of additional barriers in the way of people switching from the most harmful product down to something safer. And unfortunately, many people who smoke now, who already switched to e-cigarettes or might be in the process of that, face some hard decisions to protect their health. Can they do without nicotine altogether? Do they go to the illicit market? Do they go back to cigarettes? Do they try the increasingly futile process of trying to get a prescription for an e-cigarette. Meanwhile, overly restrictive policies have produced a violent and out of control illicit market. And this is in great contrast to New Zealand, who's embraced e-cigarettes for harm reduction and has experienced plummeting smoking rates. That's all for now. I might dive into some of the population level evidence in a future video. Let me know if you have any comments or suggestions down below. Thanks.